expression of this architecture to contrast with the ornament of the existing buildings, so that you almost have two types of buildings: very ornamented buildings and buildings without any ornament that change in the course of the day. Also thought that the relationship between these two types of architecture should always be visible in each facade and in each element of the project. And therefore we went above, in between, next to, with the new architecture to the existing architecture. We use many types of facades. I won't go into all of them, but I would like to express especially the veil and the soffits, two very important elements of the project because of the architectural shape. The veil covers all the exhibition spaces that are new to the project. It also is the facade of this box on top, the floating box that you see everywhere from the city. The veil acts as a neutral skin to this rich exhibition spaces with this rich exhibition and elements. It's a filter of light. It looks very solid, but it is actually a perforated aluminum sheet, perforated with the pattern of one of the old stairs in the existing Hackett Hall that you probably can see behind you when you look back when you're in Hackett Hall currently. And that is put on top of a facade cladding that has a champagne color. So when it catches the sun, it changes color all the time. But what it also does on the exterior is make this look of mass, and at the same time on the inside filters the light in, so that daylight, which sometimes is quite harsh in the summer times, can actually filter through to the public spaces of the front of house in a pleasant way, and actually don't heat up the building too much. You also see that we made this veil in different angles depending on where the sunlight comes from. Of course, the north, the most harsh in Australia, has been shielded the most. And the east and the west, especially with the mid-sun height, are shielded from direct influence on the exhibition spaces. Therefore, the facade, although it creates one unity overall, it has a big diversity in its angles and in its perforations. When you come close up, you can notice this. And when you're on the inside and actually going through the public loops, the circulation up or the circulation around, you get this nice filtered light in the indoor and outdoor spaces that are behind the veil. And here you see the main balcony up in the top gallery where you can actually look at the city and make this connection also visually. The veil also acts as a filter at night, so where it is pretty closed during the day, as you can see here on the left-hand side of the picture. When the light turns on, it actually becomes quite transparent, and you can see the inner organs of the museum and see the activity behind when there are events at night or when visitors are still going through during extended hours. And here you see in a bigger picture that at night this veil really changes with the spaces behind. Important part is the soffit. Because we lifted up so much of the volume, you get a large soffit that shields the city room, the civic space. And hopefully this civic space has a lot of activity. And we have already seen that is coming through. We used a copper cladding underneath the big exhibition box to reflect the activity in the city room that you can really see from afar. This soffit is therefore not only a shield and a fifth facade, but it also reflects the activity at night and during the day. But it is also a technical device. Here at opening night, last Saturday, you see that we can hang all kinds of equipment from that soffit and activate that city room. it doesn't only reflect activity in the city room, it also reflects, when you're close up to the museum, the roof of the existing buildings, which is kind of shingled and quite attractive with all its openings. You can actually see from the ground floor the projection of the top of the buildings on the cityscape. And when you're inside, it doesn't only reflect the building, but it actually also reflects the landscape that is around the building while you look at the city. This is a view from the exhibition box over the roof through the cantilever to the city. And you see clearly the roof of the existing Hackett Hall, but you also see the city afar as a skyline, and in the soffit above, the green of the surrounding areas. A play on trying to make it three-dimensional and giving this soffit a meaning.
From a historical point of view, of course, the traditional owners occupied the land for many, many thousands of years. But from 1855, when the old jail was built, through to 1913, when Hackett Hall was built, effectively there were 5 historic buildings on the site that were part of this project that needed to be revitalised or relifed. So here is just an image of the cultural precinct, and the site is within, the museum site is within that red dashed line, and you can see some of the historic buildings there. The old jail in the middle, Beaufort building is on the right, Hackett Hall is on the left, and the Jubilee building is sort of centred lower. So these are all obviously existing buildings in the site that we had to integrate into a new contemporary museum. So these are just some images of the left being the existing and the right being the new. So you can see the existing buildings, there were things that we needed to remove and retain, and we had to stitch in new elements in the blue, either in between, above, adjacent, or around. And a different view on the next slide shows a similar context, historic on the left and contemporary on the right. But again, this interrelationship of the old and new was a really important and actually a real challenge. The levels were tricky to align to get the circulation from old to new and back into old again. And the jail itself forms a centrepiece within this embrace. So just walking you through some of the existing buildings. So this building is Hackett Hall, the building that you are in now. It was once the State Library and has been relifed. And as you can see in the bottom left, we've inserted a new clear window so that the relationship between Hackett Hall and the city room is strengthened and opened. And the next slide, of course, is Otto, the blue whale, as Alec mentioned, found, I think it was in 1897, and is one of the few full blue whale skeletons anywhere in the world. So this is one of the key pieces, in the project that we really had to think about how it's displayed and how its story can be told. And the next slide is above Hackett Hall, where of course we have these vertical and horizontal connections where we've lifted up one of the existing lanterns and it basically exposed and connected old and new, providing a new dramatic connection, both physical and virtual, effectively. This is going to be is already, I think, a very popular location within the museum journey. The next building is the Jubilee building, which is from 1899 and was from the Gold Rush era, made of local stone. We worked predominantly to restore this building, highlight its unique quality in the materials, and open it up. It has gallery, commercial, and administrative uses in its new programmatic form. The next slide is the Beaufort building. Now this building, or part of the building, was very enclosed, and we effectively sliced off the western facade, providing a new glazed wall and providing obviously great daylight and a great connection into the public space and towards the old jail. So these spaces have really been opened up to natural daylight, and being part of the circulation experience are really key spaces in between the galleries, which are more what you might say as black boxes. And the next one is the Beaufort Gallery. Again, it was a very enclosed space, and as you can see on the bottom left, this was one of the more challenging galleries to connect the movement horizontally and vertically. There are many, many levels, and we've included a little Juliet balcony, which hopefully you'll get to experience if you haven't already, that punctuates into the gallery space. We also, within the Beaufort Gallery, had to create a new entry from Francis Street. So you can see the new stripe in the floor and the new ceiling on the right side of that image. And in the bottom left, you can see that connection from effectively from the city room through the courtyard and out into Francis Street. So again, adding a layer of porosity and public access into the building. We also discovered through the construction an old well that was within the Beaufort building, and it related to the old jail. So as part of the construction and exhibition and the storytelling, this became a little exhibit in the journey of your circulation through the project. And of course the old jail, which is the centerpiece of the outdoor experience, and is surrounded by public space. This is a really important historic aspect, obviously being the first building on the site, and you know, it's really part of the story and the education of what occurred and what has happened on the site and in Western Australia over time, and a very important educational aspect of the museum.
Then I will take you through the different nodes and multi-use spaces of the building. We worked very closely with the museum to create differences of intensity of the exhibition. You have the exhibition spaces themselves, largely black boxes, some with some daylight coming in, where the exhibition pieces can handle that. And then in between the wayfinding nodes, where the vertical and horizontal circulation come together, where we still have exhibition pieces and highlighting what is happening in the different exhibition spaces. Then the pure circulation that are sometimes activated on the walls, but that really try to create this route, especially around the city room that you see on the bottom right, where the datum of all the buildings is connected. This circulation space has been designed in such a way that all the acoustics and this technique is solved in the ceilings and everywhere in the same rigid way. Also, the floor has been, with terrazzo tiles, been completely the same, so that the things that are different are the walls and the facades between the new and the old. Also, the cores are always at the end and in these wayfinding nodes, so that is where you choose your circulation. This whole route is this golden vein, and therefore you also see the golden glass in this route directing you up and down. As I said, the materials are chosen to be very neutral, so that the exhibition can actually spill out from the exhibition spaces into this circulation space and become activated. When you enter the museum, you obviously don't need to buy a ticket at this moment. And you come in and you find immediately information about the collection and about your route. You can go different ways. You have also seen in many of the images we have different entry points to the museum. There's not only one coming from the city room, which means you can really wander around without any threshold, enter the building, and find your own route, find your own stories you're interested in, and come back the next time and do a complete different route and follow different stories. This entry point kind of has the clear vertical circulation embedded through the escalators that are directing you up to this datum that connects all the different buildings. And here you see at opening night the people immediately spilling through the building from here. From there, next to the escalators, you have the WA exhibit, My WA display, which kind of gives all kinds of information, not only about the connection, but also about the stories, the people, and the place. And you see that you can circulate further up, or you can go into the exhibition hall that has the roving exhibitions next to it. One of these creative notes is this lantern between Hackett Hall and the vertical circulation boxes of the city galleries. And here you see that lantern ceiling from Hackett Hall coming up, but you also see on either side the vertical circulation by stairs, which occurs 3 times in the building and makes a direct connection between the different levels. These circular stairs are made in such a way that they connect the levels seamlessly and actually connects the stories and the routes. They're also kind of having places of rest and reflection in them, and they have the stories that are told in the exhibition boxes next to them, so that you're introduced to what you're gonna see next. The prominent color is, of course, part of this storytelling, and the gold band going through the whole building, directing you from one exhibition gallery to the next. So instead of having large wayfinding, you can really see that the building plays a role in bringing you up and down and from one exhibition to the next. The large lounge note is the large stair, where there are exhibits in the front and kind of tell the stories of the change galleries and the natural history galleries, but this is also the connection up to the main top galleries that are there. You see that this stairs is quite dramatic. It can also be used for events, obviously, and you can look into the city through a direct connection, but also through this balcony that I showed before. And here you really see the exhibition comes into the node. In Hackett Hall, where you are currently, it has been mentioned already, it's a flexible multi-use space for us. It's a space where education can happen, where exchange of stories can happen, where people can really have events and come together under Otto, the blue wheel. And that is as you are there today, but also at opening night, it was an important space where the museum could actually portray its future plans. And then on a normal day, when there are no events, you can actually walk over the balconies and the new connections that are made and see Otto from very close up and from far away, which is a unique experience because normally a big skeleton like this is somewhere high up or far away and you can really not come up close. It's really impressive to see how big it is when you're so close to it.
And as we mentioned right at the start, you know, this project is very important to be contextual, and we wanted to respect the traditional owners and work closely with them to provide, you know, a scheme that they could embrace and feel comfortable. So some of the themes we looked at were thematic bands across the ground plane through the city room, for example, of earth, fire and water, and cultural elements within the space that include a dance circle, fire pit, etc. And, you know, connection to country elements, welcome to country elements. Also the softscape, really thinking about the 6 seasons and how they can integrate and be part of the storytelling through, you know, natural flora and fauna and the activities that occur through those different 6 seasons. And they come together in a combined plan. So the connection to country was important, and as I mentioned before, it's very porous, and we identified and located 6 landscape connection to country elements at the perimeter to provide welcoming points at those porous nodes that connect into the city and signify a welcoming moment and gesture to the site. We also looked at the materiality relating to those 6 seasons and worked hard at integrating those through the different themes and materials and spaces through the public spaces, whether it be dry or cool or hot, and again reflecting the activities relevant to those seasons. And the materials on the next slide in relation to the connected to country elements relate to the 6 seasons, and we used materials like charred wood, limestone, jarrah, granite, and earth and murray that really identify again those connected to country elements and the moments for entry into the site. And the next image is an aerial within the city room showing the different bands, the tapestry through the site, and the different elements within, including the dance circle that is kind of just in the middle of that image, and the specific landscape and softscape, and also the vine that I'll touch on that is just adjacent to the old jail. And so here you can see the interesting tones and reflections of the building, both old and new, and the way the landscape elements sit within and are scattered through the public space. And the next image is quite a graphic aerial showing those bands that I mentioned before, and the dance circle adjacent to the jail, and the different landscape elements as you move from the right side, which is the city room, through the site and towards Francis Street. I mentioned the grapevine. So this is the oldest grapevine in Western Australia and dates back to, we're told, around the 1850s to 60s, I believe. And of course, this had to remain on the site, and it was basically in the middle of the site. So you can imagine this was a 2-year construction site going on and buzzing around it. And to everyone's credit involved, it survived and is now thriving in its new environment there. So here are just a series of images as you walk around the public space and through the landscape. You can see the dance circle there in the middle of the screen for Welcome to Country and different ceremonies. And as you move around the public space, this is the east side of the old jail, which is the junction of the thematics of fire and water, and actually is where a cafe would spill out there on the right-hand side. And the next image is looking back towards the city room. It's the main pedestrian link from Francis Street heading towards the library. And you can see the transparency into the gallery and the public spaces on the right and the jail on the left. So this image again is looking through one of the openings out towards James Street, and we mentioned how porous the building is into the public space and the public realm beyond, but also the connections into the building. The idea being that whether you're inside or out, there's a constant connection to the environment within the city room, but also at moments to the outside and the city beyond. And this is as you move closer towards James Street with what we refer to as a knowledge circle, or a place on the left for seating and meeting, and one of the exhibits, a meteorite. The museum has an incredible meteorite collection, and you can imagine being such a large state and things that come from the sky. Many of them end up in this museum, which is also incredibly interesting. And one of the last images is, of course, one of the main entries from James Street. And this also goes back to that relationship and the work that we did here to try and combine old and new, and have equal weight towards all the stories that can be told in the museum from the past, present and future. And I think the last image was from heading towards that entry from, imagine you've come from the city and you're heading down James Street, and that would be that entry.
The last section goes very quick, but with this we really want to show that we looked at all scales. We looked very closely at the collection, at the stones and the richness of the other elements, and how they could be displayed in the museum for very close inspection, to some of the more exciting stories that are known more around the world, and where people can really see how historic and animals in the region makes the sea and the land of the place of Western Australia, to trying to connect this all through architectural means and making the flow through the museum very natural, to a kind of a readable building in the cityscape close up, and making connections in many ways to its surroundings, from close up with the city room, a new place, civic place to the city, out to the city through the city galleries and open balconies, connecting this whole precinct to the city for a future that is rich and enriched with the culture that is within the museum spaces. Of course, work like this is the work of a big team. Here we see obviously the museum team, the minister and the architectural team and Multiplex, who built the building together by the gentlemen and women that were heading up this large team. It's an enormous effort of many people, not only within the architectural team, but within all. And I would like to thank all of them and acknowledge their great spirit while building this project in only 4 years. It was an unbelievable joy to work on it. And therefore, I'm very sad that I'm not in the room with you because of COVID-19. But I'm soon going to be back and look at your building finished. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Is that on?
Stephen.
I'm on.
I would like to invite the panelists up on the stage now. So I think Irene, Marion, Paul, Peter. Yeah. Okay, so you know who I am, you know who Irene is, Marion Derckx, the ambassador for the Kingdom of the Netherlands here in Australia, Paul Jones from OMA, Brisbane, Peter Dean on my right from Hassell, based here in Perth. And I think I just now hand back to you, Stephen, for the Q&A.
Thanks very much, Alec. Just to give, before we go into the Q&A, I'm just going to explain a little bit to both the audience in attendance at Hackett Hall and also those online. Rather than do a 1 hour Q&A, after which you find after 5 minutes you've got this brilliant question and need to wait 55 minutes to ask it, we're going to break the Q&A into 4 sections. Not quite equal sections, and so we're going to take the audience through those. Now, the audience at Hackett Hall, you would have been given some cards when you came in, and you're welcome to write your name, full name on the cards, and you can write questions at any time and hand them to the attendants in the hall. Those who are online, you can put your questions in the comment section of Arc Media, or indeed, I think, on our Facebook page. Thank you to David and to Mark for that great presentation before we go into this. I hadn't seen that presentation before, and I think what was extraordinary was that it showed in a very agile and elegant manner level of complexity and texture and depth in the museum. And I think that it's that play between layers and texture and history and an incredible lightness as well, which is really makes the whole program really, really unique. And I think we'll get to that in a later Q&A session. But I really wanted to start, Alec, with yourself and ask you a question, because it's fundamental to the very essence of the museum, which is Boola Bardip, which is many stories. And it's something we've spoken a little bit about, but especially for the international audience or even the national audience, those stories that you gathered and harvested from the people of Western Australia, what was really that process?
Okay, thanks, Stephen. And I'll begin by slightly correcting something, David. He showed a few slides of what he said was the opening event. It wasn't the opening event. That was actually a fundraising event we had here. And the reason I'm pointing that out is not out of pedantry, but the opening event was very much a people's event. And I mentioned before to the audience here about the ballot that we had. And our Premier, Mark McGowan, was very clear that this is the People's Museum and that the people should come to the event. So that was Saturday morning. So just in case you thought you didn't get invited to the glitzy party, that was there actually wasn't a glitzy party. But that's really important to the philosophy of the museum. Many Stories was about creating a museum by, with, and for the people. And if that sounds sanctimonious, it's not supposed to. It's acknowledging that there are so many stories, so many truths, and particularly in a land such as WA, where we have many contested stories with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but also contested stories that exist today, and you will find those expressed throughout the museum. We believe that the museum should be a place for free expression. We believe that many voices should be represented. And we also had a principle that said we would try not to speak for people who could speak for themselves. And so in that process, our team, led very ably by Renee Woodhams, who was sat at the front with the headphones, gesticulating madly to me before to show how multi-talented she is. She masterminded that process, which involved over 54,000 Western Australians. And that is the cohort of people that actually contributed to this. And you will see that throughout the whole museum. You will see many different aspects, many different perspectives. You will see some uplifting stories, amusing stories, engaging stories. You'll also see some pretty tough stories as well, and some very emotional stories and some quite painful stories. As our Premier said at the weekend, some stories soaked in tears. And indeed, I would say some soaked in blood also. And so it was very important that we had all those perspectives. And beyond that, the fact that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander content is not just in the Narankot Budjawurrun Gallery, Our Heart, Our Country, Our Spirit Gallery that is on the ground floor, the first gallery you encounter here, but it's woven throughout every gallery in the museum. Maybe I should pass to Irene to comment on that, because Irene, as chair of our Aboriginal Advisory Committee, long-standing chair, I would say she and our committee are the conscience of the museum in many ways, and they hopefully keep us honest.
We try. Look, with the stories being permeating right throughout the galleries, it was a very clear decision that we made that we didn't just want to have an Aboriginal gallery that you went through and that's all you saw. We wanted to reflect the stories of us as a community. So that's whether you're people who have made Western Australia your home, or whether it was Torres Strait Islander peoples, or whether it was Aboriginal peoples. We wanted to make sure that we stood side by side, we stood proud, we stood within the tapestry of our state. And we think that we've achieved that and achieved that very well.
Irene, you're the chair of the Aboriginal Advisory Committee, and your engagement with the museum has gone on for many, many years, correct?
Yes, that's right. Over 25 years.
Wow, okay.
Well, that's the official engagement. At the weekend, I spoke about, in fact, on Monday night, I spoke about when I was 16, and it was this very hall that I used to sneak into from a side door. I worked across the road in Beaufort Street, and I used to sneak in across into here, into Hackett Hall, and I just used to marvel at all the books and go into the corners and climb up those spiral staircases, and always loved the books back then, still do. But I was saying to one of our architects earlier this evening, I am just so glad my spiral staircases are still here.
You're not going anywhere. To go to that point that you raised, Alec, with Irene there about the fact that Aboriginal stories are woven throughout the curatorial or museographical mission of the museum. Can you tell us about the way the galleries are organised and the names of those galleries and the missions of each of the galleries?
Surely, thanks, Stephen. So, again, we always said that we weren't going to try and build the old museum in a new shiny building. And so you wouldn't find a butterfly gallery and a bird gallery or a pure history gallery. So we've taken a holistic approach, and maybe Nallancourt Budgewurrun as the, if you like, the Aboriginal cultural materials gallery is the nearest thing to a traditional gallery that we have. But even that, you will find an immense amount of different content, a lot of novel multimedia and the like. But the other galleries all try and cut across our world, I would say, because we always say the world's not organised the way that we as museum curators organise it. It's a holistic experience. So as we step up from Nallancourt Budgewurrun, in this part of the building, we come to the Changes Gallery, which talks very much about the way in which humans have impacted upon our landscape. Everything from first fire stick farming, from the early management and conservation of water, right through to major issues such as obviously resource exploitation, climate change and the like. Next door to that, you'll find the Origins Gallery, which tells the story of the beginning of the universe right up to the most contemporary science today through the square kilometre array, but always balanced with those Aboriginal perspectives and Aboriginal voices. One of my favourite elements in that Origins Gallery is the section on Murrajugga, the Burrup Peninsula, which is an amazing place where, as I always describe it, there's a human chronicle over geological time in the rocks there through the Aboriginal petroglyphs there. And that's all produced through projection mapping. If we go on up, we have a wildlife gallery which deals with the biodiversity. We live in a world biodiversity hotspot. For those who are online and look at a map of WA and it looks a bit featureless, don't be fooled. My mum still lives in the UK and thinks I live in a desert. I don't. I live in one of the world's top 30 biodiversity hotspots. It's extraordinary, the place here, and that's what the Wildlife Gallery deals with. Connections is all about our link to the rest of the world, and that's very much looking at our Indian Ocean coast again. For those not in the room here, there is a perception sometimes on the east coast of Australia that only the Pacific Ocean laps our shores. Well, believe it or not, over this end, we are the major kind of city on the Indian Ocean rim, and that's a really important story through the first diasporas that came here, right through our travel, our trade, commerce today, tourism, and of course our relationship with East Asia. Moving around, I think at some point somebody mentioned the Innovations Gallery, which is pretty much what it says it is. It's looking at all the many different innovations in WA. We have a Reflections Gallery, which is the stories of the people of WA, told again through their voices, and that's probably one of the largest galleries, that and the Wildlife Gallery, the largest gallery here. Again, dealing with many, many different perspectives, many different aspects of our lives. And then we sit here under Otto, prior mentioned, and this is the Stan Perrin WA Treasures Gallery, and around us there are some of the treasures from the collections, the state collections that we have here in WA, so from the library, the art gallery, the museum and the State Records Office, and that will change from time to time, but you'll find some old favourites here. what you can't see behind the curtain here, which has been set up for tonight, is the bison, which everybody remembers here. So we had to find an excuse to get that in somehow. So that was the treasures gallery. But the point being that, as I say, we've not tried to adopt traditional approaches. We've really tried to present the world as we experience it.
I can't believe you actually forgot the temporary exhibition gallery.
Well, I did.
And the external galleries.
I didn't forget the temporary exhibition gallery. Those are the permanent galleries, because the temporary exhibition gallery is the what's in there will depend what we're showing at any one time. But yeah, the reason it's worth mentioning that is if you come in here now, between now and April, the songlines tracking the Seven Sisters exhibition from Canberra is here, and you must see it. It's phenomenal, and it's the first stage of a big international tour, and we got it here first in WA. So thank you for reminding me, Peter. And you also mentioned that a few things leak out into the public spaces as well, and that's quite deliberate.
I'm going to segue over to Peter, or perhaps Paul, who's up there as well, to talk about the architecture and the interplay between the architectural program and the curatorial program. But just before that, I just want to remind audience members that if anybody wants to ask a question, we'd love to have your questions. If you're in the audience at Hackett Hall, you have a card. You can write down your questions with your full name on it, and you can hand those to the attendants, who I think are there and should be obvious to you. And if you're online, you can, on ArchDaily, you can put a question into the comment section. We'd be happy to field your questions there as well. Just to go on to that and into that point with Peter or Paul, is how that museological or that curatorial mission was clearly very, very, very strong. How did you pick up and run with that, and what was the interplay between the architecture and the programming?
That's a good question. Look, I think, actually just following on from the last discussion about the storylines, I think it's interesting just to note very early that it's really a catalytic project in a lot of ways, and we're here for the opening and fortunate to be here at this current moment. But we came up here at quite late on Saturday evening, and this place was a buzz. And I think what's super important is that it's catalytic for the city and this precinct, but then I think it also is a social and cultural catalyst. And it's quite clear when you come to the building and really the content, the interweaving of the Aboriginal and Indigenous culture through the project is very clear right through the landscape and the ground plane, and then also into the floor levels themselves. So I think it's a very interesting catalyst for the city in many ways, not just about architecture and urban design.
Yeah, it's been rewarding to see in the first week the amount of events and range of events we've had hosted in the museum and the city room. And even within the galleries themselves, it's been extraordinary to see the museum come to life in those different settings. And if you haven't seen them online yet, go onto the museum website to see the various videos and drone footage and dance interpretations, which Alec might elaborate on. They're absolutely extraordinary, the way they're using their space, the content in the museum. It just becomes a diverse range of stories.
But I think maybe going back to the question a little bit, it's quite clear, and obviously David and Mark showed the way that the building's organised, but fundamentally the building's been pushed, the programmatic requirements of the project have been pushed to the perimeter of the site, so the building has very much an engagement with the city in the way that it addresses the streets. But as a consequence of that, has allowed this city room in the middle to be quite open and welcoming. So your actual way that you enter the building is through its heart, through its middle, and that's very open, and both as a space, but also very transparent. The glazing is literally, you can see into the building. But as a consequence, it means that the way that you circulate around the building through the horizontal and the vertical loops does mean that the actual content is actually packaged in different ways around the building. It's not just a building that is full of exhibition spaces at a centre. You get to experience it in your own way, so that by using these circulation loops, you can, and I've got to say, we didn't realise until we came here this week, there's so much to digest. You could spend a week here and not see a quarter of it. So it's really kind of an interesting setup, because what it does allow for people to come and explore the building in part and return and see a bit more, return and see a bit more. And I think that's kind of really a credit to the ambition of the client and the way that they establish the brief and the depth of content that they have. And you know, I think in some ways the building design ended up reflecting that.
Stephen, maybe from an international perspective, I could say something about this. Because Western Australia was new to me when we started this project. I had only been once to Perth. I never discovered the land and the sky and the sea before. But what struck me when I was there was the way you could find your own way wandering around and discovering beautiful places, discovering content, discovering people, and also the people engagement is extremely friendly in this part of the world. So going through and making the concept design, we really wanted to make a design that would facilitate this wandering around and that really could accommodate people experiences in different ways, from different backgrounds, from different parts of the world, from different localities, and that could really take their own curation of the building and curation of the collection, what they were looking for. And that is, I think, what we try to do, is to create a background for wandering around, rather than creating a building that's specified how it should be used. And that, I think, is the main thing we constantly tested. Can I go in different ways? Can I experience it in my own way? Can I engage with the detail or focus on the overview? And that was, for the architecture, extremely important.
I think before, and that's, I'd like to, sorry, was someone else? No, okay, right. Just as we go into that, I think we should really need to go into deep on the architecture. I want to circle back to Alec, Alec reference the Pacific vision that Australians tend to have, that basically is the East Coast that sets up the cultural discourse and more or less dominates. The museum is interesting, and it was interesting that CNN should nominate it alongside, for instance, M+ in Hong Kong. M+ is very much about reconfiguring or changing the perspective and looking at culture from a Pan-Asian perspective. I wanted to talk to Alec a little bit about the mission of the museum internationally. You're internationally facing beyond the shores of Perth, right?
Steve, we were struggling to hear you a bit there, to be honest, so maybe I'll just answer a question that I want to answer rather than the one than you asked me. But I think you were talking about international perspective. As I do that, I do want to just pick up what Paul said and agree thoroughly. I mean, I think David used the word porous quite a lot, and we always said we wanted a museum that was permeable. And that, you know, we actually turned the museum inside out in a way, and that's exactly what I think this this design has done. We said we wanted a signature building, but one that wasn't intimidating. I think it's done that as well, and I just pay tribute to the architectural team for actually being able to respond to what was almost an impossible brief, I think, and actually do it so well. In terms of those international relations, so I gave a little bit of a hint of it before, and again, for those who are not versed in the geography, I mean, Perth is Australia's Indian Ocean capital. We are the first city in Australia to have a direct flight, for instance, to London. This is a major international centre. We like to talk of ourselves as being in the zone, and that means we're within a two-hour time zone limit of about 60% of the world's population. This is a kind of happening place now, and this is something that we really want to ensure that people understand. And I must admit, I've chided my colleagues on occasions where they say, this is a museum about Western Australia. Well, it absolutely is about Western Australia, but it's also about Western Australia's place in the world and how it relates to the rest of the world. And every now and again, we all fall into the trap of saying, you know, this museum is world class. Well, of course it is, but why shouldn't it be? It's almost like we're kind of surprised that it's world class because it's in Western Australia. This is something that, I mean, again, Stephen mentioned the CNN, you know, top 10 buildings anticipated to shape the world in 2020, just in case you missed it first time. And that's the, you know, from our point of view, you know, that's where we should be. You know, we are a major international capital. We're a major international economic powerhouse. We are probably, thanks to the great efforts of our government, in about the safest place in the world right at the moment in the pandemic. And I'm not at all surprised that if you come here, the number of people who've just looked at this in the last week or so, and breathless is a word that actually comes to mind. And so we want people, once the borders are opened up, when it's safe to do so, I believe people will travel all around the world to come here, and so they should.
My powers of divination tell me there are some questions at all. Are there some questions from the audience?
Yes. From a more international aspect, we've got some questions that are coming from online and from the audience, but this one is coming from online. As an environmentalist, I appreciate the consideration of the 6 seasons, categorised by 40,000 years of Aboriginal habitation and their connection to the Australian environment. What lessons can the international design community learn when considering climate change from Aboriginal perspective of experience of nature and seasonality in architecture? And this has come from Callum Nash. So
we're all looking at each other now. Who's gonna? I'm looking at Irene, and she's looking at me. Do you want me to start? You want me to start? Yeah, and again, for those online, we here on Noongar, well, all Noongar country, particularly Whadjuk Noongar country, we do have the 6 seasons. We're in the season of Canberra at the moment. Again, for those who don't know the place, we always know we're in Canberra because that's when the magpies, the Australian magpies, chicks are in the nest, and their parents come and try and knock you off your bike, which they do to me every day at the moment. So it's there's so much knowledge, as you say, 40,000, I think we're now saying 60,000, and I'm sure that date will be pushed back again and again as people...
Alec, it's actually 65
Yeah,
plus.
I heard 65 the other day.
In the Northern Territory
That's
was
right.
the latest radiocarbon dating.
And some of you may have heard Peter Veth on the radio the other day, on Radio National from UWA, just describing the antiquity of some of the human evidence of human occupation and tool making here, which predates so much in Europe, actually. And so it is a question of looking. Aboriginal people knew how to find water, how to conserve water. They knew, they lived quite comfortably on the land. They knew how to actually manage the land in ways. I remember, and again, I'm sure he wouldn't say it now, but in Geoffrey Blaney's sort of history of Australia, saying that there was no agriculture before the white people came. Well, that's clearly nonsense. It just wasn't any kind of agriculture that they'd experienced before. And so, for me, every part of this museum, there are learnings, and there are learnings from all cultures, but particularly from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. And we've spoken to something like 60 different language groups now. We've had people out on country talking to those people and collecting those stories, and that's where that knowledge comes from. And I think more and more we're beginning to understand that actually they knew a thing or two, and we could learn quite a lot from them.
That's absolutely right. And what comes to mind immediately for me is today we call it Savannah Fire Management or burning. Aboriginal people, we burned our country anyway for a number of different reasons. Sometimes it was for the regrowth and the replenishment. Other times it was to get food. If you burn country, snakes and goannas will come running out. You catch them, that's your food source. So there were lots of reasons why we used fire and burning, and today there's this big push environmentally to support caring for country programs that are run through the government and engage Aboriginal people to care for their own country, as it should be, and there are lots and lots of lessons being learned.
Is there
Yes, there's another one that's come in. It's a telling question for the architects on the board. Can you please speak a bit more about the reasoning around the gold banisters and the gold themes throughout the building?
Happy to do on. That's the. It was inspired by the Quartz Stone. That was one of the original collections in the original museum, and there's a seam of gold that was discovered in that Quartz Stone. So that actually takes you through the narrative loops and the circulation loops, so you can see it externally through the woven mesh glazing, and then internally that's represented through the circulation spiral stairs and the handrails.
So in some ways that is also goes back to the industry that WA has a very strong resources industry, and in some ways it's represented in the building through that gold seam. It's wealth and prosperity comes from there.
I'm just going to, if we can, since we're talking. Am I breaking up?
You are breaking up.
Keep cutting, Alec.
Freestyle. Sing again.
Go, Alec.
Shall I ask a question? Because the ambassador hasn't spoken yet. And I think it's time that maybe you spoke a little bit about I guess we already had a very close link with the museum and the embassy, but also obviously WA, long-standing link. And now, of course, we have a wonderful link with OMA through the Dutch team. Perhaps you'd like to reflect on that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, he sits a very proud ambassador. I was asked, how does the Netherlands think about this museum when I am representing the Netherlands? Well, the Netherlands is very proud. And it's for a number of reasons. It is indeed the shared cultural heritage, what you said. The Dutch were the first who arrived, the first Western Europeans who set foot on Western Australia more than 400 years ago. We fought with the Australians at the end of the Second World War in the northern part of Western Australia to keep the enemy out. We are working contemporarily in the recent time in the SKA, and now we have a new part of shared cultural heritage, because this is really a product that is really the result of Dutch-Australian cooperation. So yes, I'm very proud, and it also makes my life very easy, because as an ambassador I try to build bridges between the Netherlands and Australia. And now I can say, if people say, why would we work with the Dutch? I can only say, why don't you go to Western Australia and experience the West Australian Museum? Then you know why. I spoke, of course, with David Gianotten for quite a while about the opening, and him not being here, which really is terrible for him. You know, it's like your child is growing up, and the day it leaves the house, you cannot be there. You cannot be there to see how it goes. And as he describes it, it's a building under construction, it's a concept, and the day it starts to live, the people take it over, you can't see what happens to it. As he says, I don't mind what the art critics say. I wonder whether people want to come to the museum. And well, we heard you saying, Alec, before the end of the year you will have 420,000 people who want to visit the museum. So I think David can go and sleep a good night of sleep, because it has succeeded, the ambition. Okay, going back to that Dutch-Australian product, what is it then? What is that combination? And as I understood it, David and Mark said from the beginning, we are going to do this together. We are together in this. So the Dutch and the Australian architects were in it together. So it's a fully Australian museum, come about through a Dutch approach. And that Dutch approach is above all a consultative approach. And if you allow me a few minutes, yes. I go back to the year 700 when we started to make dikes. If you build a dike to keep your feet dry, everybody has to be involved. Everybody has to, all the stakeholders have to take possession of that. Otherwise you get wet feet. So the consultative approach is really part of how we work in the Netherlands. After the Second World War, our country was really in shambles. We had to build up our cities. So what you saw is town planning integrated with architecture, with design. So the integration of different disciplines is also something that is very close to our heart. Why does it make my life easier? Because, well, if we talk about that consultative approach and we look at the Western Australian Museum, we see that there was a project with a certain budget, a certain timeline, and a question by the client. It has been delivered within time, within the budget, and 54,000 people have been consulted. I don't say that the Dutch architect consulted 54,000 people, that was René who did that, but the principle of working like that, so you work with your clients and all the time you consult them, are we still on the same page? What do we want exactly? Where do you want to go? That is very much a Dutch approach. And it makes my life easier because we want to work with Australia on all kind of innovative processes, working towards a circular economy, work in green recovery after COVID. And these kind of processes are very, very complicated, and they only come about in a consultative approach. So that's the Dutch side of it, which goes very broad, which counts for architecture. But it is true for it's a cultural thing, and it goes through many different sectors. So that's my perspective.
Thank you. Stephen, do you want to have another go? He's gone. Has he gone completely? Oh, okay.
He has gone completely.
Okay.
Can't
Well,
see him anyway.
luckily, I have the questions that he was going to ask here. So just picking up on what Marion said, you talked about that. I mean, one of the things that I know he wanted to ask the architectural team was how this collaboration came about.
That was exactly my question.
He is back.
I'm here. But can I pick this up? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Amazing. Because I think that Marion's point was so important, because one of the things is that the usual paradigm in Australia is to have, if you have these competitions, you get a very high profile international practice and you get a local executive practice, let's be very frank. Here what I find is fascinating is that you have a very high level international practice and a very high level local practice. So you have confrères, you have colleagues at a very equal level. And to my mind, that really plays out in this entire project. And that would be my question, is exactly how did that collaboration work given two very strong practices?
Can I just maybe correct you there, Stephen? I mean, of course we are a local practice,
yes,
but Hassell is in itself an international practice.
That was the subtext, is that you're been around since you're very international.
Yeah, so I think the perception of international and local, sometimes the story comes out differently to the reality. I mean, sometimes we're a local practice for the same client and an international practice for the same client 2 weeks later. So, you know, but of course, I mean, these projects are a real journey and a joy, as David said. And I think right from the get-go, I can't exactly remember how it occurred, but I know David and I knew that there was an inkling that both of our practices were potentially to be asked to work together. So my recollection, and it's over 4 years ago now, was that David and I got on the phone and talked about you know, museums and the opportunity and the ambition and how the procurement was going to occur, and we talked about our philosophy and how we work and how we'd like to work, perhaps in an ideal world. And you know, we had worked together in the past, but basically it was a pretty easy conversation. We agreed to work together equally from start to finish, and you know, there's lots of reasons for that. And trust is one of them. These projects are difficult, and we needed to work together in a trusted way, and also to work in an open way. You know, I think we both learned from each other, and I think we both pushed each other, our practices. And I think that's what's really great, an open, creative culture. And you know, that extends to everybody involved in this project. Alec and Alec's team, the multiplex. You know, these are tough, challenging projects, and I think David and I both agreed part of our job is to push that ambition, and I think that's what we aim for together.
On a practical level, it's very, very important to decide that we would simply be together in Perth for the whole journey. Very often you see that practices collaborate, and one practice has the advantage over the concept and the other has the advantage over the execution, or in different ways. But we decided that when you want to learn from each other, when you want to learn from the place, and when you want to make a contextual building, which this had to be, because it had to tell the stories of the context, to really say, okay, we make it there and we make it together in all the steps we do. And that didn't mean that there were not distribution of responsibilities, but it meant simply one team on one spot working in one way. And by doing so, which was surprisingly easy, in my opinion, by doing so, we achieved that it was not only a learning curve for ourselves, but we were also able to respond to everything that was happening in the project at the spot. Kind of what I sometimes experience working in a country very far away, I can't follow it to the detail level that I could follow here. And that was an extreme, interesting kind of approach. And that delivered, in my opinion, a very contextual building.
You've had, David, you personally, and of course OMA a little bit more broadly, has had quite a bit of involvement on the east side of Australia, for instance, especially in Melbourne. You mentioned before the particularity of Western Australia. Can you expand a little bit more on that with Dutch eyes, what the difference was for you? Or was it more the project, the scale and scope of the project?
I think the main difference is the connection to the land and to the place. Kind of people in Western Australia are so aware of where they are, so aware of their history, so aware of their nature and of their resources, which is a very big difference, in my opinion, to the other side of the country. So it's really a place that thrives because of its awareness and thrives because of the many things that happen there in a natural context and in a human context. And that to me is a big difference. And so you could easily tap into people by connecting to these type of stories and connecting to these resources, which helps a lot by making a concept for a building.
It's interesting. I mean, two international practices. Hassell was established, I think, in the 1930s in Adelaide, and I believe OMA was established probably in the late 60s, early 70s or so. Two international practices working on a museum in Western Australia. What were the takeaways? What did you learn from doing this particular project that might inform other projects that you do elsewhere? Or is it so specific to place that what happens in Perth stays in Perth?
In some ways, I would say that the approach is very explorative, and I think there's a very contextual response to the design, both to the brief and the context as a result of that exploration. So I think in some ways for us, going to another project, it's not that you can replicate the project per se, but you could certainly replicate the process that you go through to achieve an outcome. I just recall in the design comp, there was a massive pile of blue foam. There's so many studies around, massing studies around different configurations and ways to organise the building. So working at a very large scale conceptual level right through to a fine detail around what material the floor finish should be and what colours it should be based on that level of exploration. And what applied to this project may differ for another, but the process would probably remain consistent.
And I think that was the success of the joint venture, was that we both shared the similar process and mindset and the way we actually approach design and conversations. And David has a saying of, sorry for being Dutch, in terms of being direct. I'm from Yorkshire, I'm fairly direct, so actually we're very honest and open with each other all the way through and could challenge and debate designs in a similar mindset that we actually all could embrace.
It's been a curious time because Mark, you've not been able to be in Western Australia since January, I don't think, and David neither. So there's been a great trust you've had to have in your colleagues to be almost your eyes and ears on the ground. How has that been for you?
Well, yeah, I think we were both there in, maybe it was the end of November or December last year for practical completion. So it's actually coming on 12 months. It's crazy to think how time has gone so fast. I mean, clearly the landscape architecture was nowhere near complete. The public realm and all the exhibition content was nowhere near being installed. So, you know, I think, you know, like David, it's very, very disappointing to not be there. I quoted the same story before. It is kind of like, you know, one of your children that you can't see, and it's difficult because you know the personalities there, and you hear the stories of the personality and the experience. But well, I'm just definitely looking forward to getting over there. Let's put it that way.
For me, it is kind of interesting to see that although you're a leader in a company, you have unbelievable trust and can have unbelievable trust in the people that work for you all around the world, and actually also have an enormous trust in the people that build the project, and actually can be far away and can look from setting the intention of the building and not having to be there yourself constantly, which is unbelievable nice and difficult to experience at the same time. But the team did a great job over there, and big part of that is on stage. That kind of just was, they were able to do what we set about, and they did it greatly.
Right. Could I just take a quick break to just say if there are questions in the live audience at Hackett Hall, the physical audience in Hackett Hall, or indeed the online audience, we're happy to take questions. I don't know whether there are any in the hall at the moment, are there?
Yes. I can pick up one here that's that's relating back to all the idea of stories that has been portrayed certainly through the museum. As you can have stories designed to elicit a certain emotional response in the viewer reader, how could a building or an architectural design, how does that evoke a similar response?
Can you read that again?
So I read it as, no, I could answer it. I read it as in relation to the telling of stories and how stories are so deeply invoked into the museum and the theatre of how the museum has portrayed its content. I guess the reader is asking about how the building or the architecture invokes a similar story or response.
I'll have a crack, Paul.
Well,
I think for us, stories are always about sharing. If a piece of information, a traumatic story, for us, the building really reflects it about creating a range of settings. So you can actually have that comfortable environment outside, inside, with content. It's just about creating environments rather than. And stories are personal, so the building is a vehicle for those stories to be told. So the content is one aspect. The external facade is designed to be illuminated and projected on, so depending on what the event is happening throughout the year, or in the galleries, it's a vial, it's a canvas for those stories to be shared. So I think it's about facilitating a range of settings rather than being one particular story.
I might just add to that, Peter. I mean, certainly that concept of sharing, again, is exactly what the museum's about. We said we wouldn't tell people stories, we would allow them to share their stories with us. But I think there's also a technical aspect to this, which was the way the project was conceived as a managing contractor model. So Multiplex came in, they brought the architectural team, but the nature of that meant that we worked, and it's been referred to several times already, very closely together as a series of teams throughout the whole project, and we were able to conceive of the content as the building itself was being developed. Too often, I believe, you see museum buildings that are created as architectural icons in a way, and then the museum has to sort of fit everything in afterwards. This was never done like this. This was a very much a kind of harmonious and an iterative process, which was allowed by that model. And I think you will see that as you go around.
I think I'd add that the way that the building is transparent reflects the way that the museum wants to be transparent and the state wants to be transparent in the content that it's showing. So the building's not defensive. The building itself is, in fact, intentionally open. And that's, I think, very socially and culturally important, because by being open, then you get to have all these opportunities present themselves in both the content and experiencing the place.
If I may, as a consumer of only 2 hours now that I've been roaming around in the museum, it was striking for me to see how the stories of the West Australian people are interwoven. It's truly interwoven, and with the ambition of saying, well, this should be a museum, it should build on the past and look to the future. It's obvious that you are able to take the next step here with all the openness, with all the spaces where you can sit and lay down, learn. It is really a place of conversation, of dialogue. And I think that the architects and all the people who have worked on the project, it's a compliment. You really have brought it back, brought together so well. It's really a place of conversation, and I think it's a place that can connect the whole of Perth and the whole of West Australia. These are all very big words, but it really has come together here. I'm very impressed, truly.
Yeah, and I think that dialogue between the old and the new in the physical buildings is the exciting and really rich part of the project. All those spaces with circulations and breakout are all adjacent to and between the old and the new. And I think as you walk through the project, it's extraordinarily hard to photograph this project because it's just so diverse in its scale. You know, you go from very small, intimate spaces to grand spaces. That dialogue is a real key point of difference for the project.
Go ahead. Sorry.
If I could just add, working with the architects from an Aboriginal perspective has been just a joy. I mean, obviously you do have your tensions from time to time, but they were very willing to listen to our strong voices, and I need to say our strong voices because some of the conversations were like that. But they were very willing to go back and revisit and have a look at what we were saying so that it could all be incorporated into the building. And I know we've talked about the gold a little bit, but from my perspective and from our Aboriginal Advisory Committee, the gold bands around the top of the building reflect beautifully in the sun in the evening when it's setting. So for us, it's truly Western Australian. It's where the sun sets, and we love that part of it.
That's great to hear.
Can I move this, because I think this is this idea that Marion said about the dialogue, the way the space dialogue. Am I cutting up again? All right. Let's talk about the city room, the negative space, which is the city room, and the way it bleeds into the cultural precinct around it.
I think the city room was the key element of the design from day one.
Okay.
So we tested in the competition phase already. We tested the site in a way that the program could easily fill the whole site and leave no landscape or outdoor space. But by working with the volumes and actually lifting some of these volumes up, we surprisingly found this heart of the museum, which is an outdoor heart, partly shielded and partly open to the sky, that become the center point and was not asked in the brief. Of course, there was outdoor space asked in the brief, but not such a multifunctional civic space for the city. It also lowers the threshold for people going to the museum. Many of us are maybe brought up by going to museums, but many people don't have that luxury, and actually there is something needed to get them there. And by bringing them simply seamless through the city, seamless through a door and let them wander in, helps enormous. And that kind of civic space plays a huge role in there. You can go step by step and experience it step by step. And so when we presented that in the competition phase, I think that was an aha moment for everybody. Is this possible? Such a big negative space with all that program around it on just this site. And that for us made it the central theme. An outdoor space that kind of could be programmed in many, many ways, but that also kind of can be the gathering point, the catalyst from the city perspective. So yes, that has been the heart of the project, and I think if you look now, it is already the heart of the precinct and of the building itself, where even exhibition spills in out.
I think, Stephen, just to finish that, you know, as Paul mentioned, we did a lot of studies for the project around the same programmatic volume, and you know, sometimes it's really difficult and takes a long time to come up with a concept that is very clear and understandable. And I think in this case, when we created the idea of the city room, it somehow felt, it was a bit of a surprise, but it felt obvious. It felt like the right answer. And I think we all bought into that. And the beauty of that is that it's easy to convey that story, that message for what it is, why it is, and it feels right for the place. And I think from that moment on, the project had buy-in, collective buy-in, so that everybody was part of the journey, you know, through the process.
It's an important site for storytelling, the city room as well. So Irene, what for instance, is there Indigenous storytelling throughout the city room?
Yeah, sorry, we struggled there. I think Stephen was asking about the Aboriginal narrative throughout the city room, which I guess relates particularly to those wajak plantings, the dance circle.
Yeah. Look, the way it's turned out, I was apprehensive, I have to be honest. I was thinking, oh my goodness, is this going to be a place where you get a lot of itinerant people wandering through? But seeing what's evolved with the gardens and the meeting places and the dancing circle and all of those things that are culturally significant. I mean, you've got the grass tree there. Who would have thought to put the grass tree there? Our balga bush. So for me, from an Aboriginal perspective, it's something that's really to take in consideration when you're walking around and to really understand what you're looking at. Some folk might think when you see the dance area that it's you know, a play pit for young children, but you need to be really mindful about the interpretation of the space and what we've endeavoured to achieve.
I think one of the things, Stephen, is that this place where we sit today, in antiquity was a wetland. There were lots of water channels around here, and wajak people would come here and they would gather to hunt here. It was a really important place for them. And I think we both have the hope that this will be a place where wajak people will come again together. And it's the kind of, and as Peter said earlier, I think, I mean, it actually extends the museum. The museum isn't just what's inside the walls, it's what's outside the walls as well. And that's really important.
And Alec, if I can just add, our previous museum, and this goes back, I mean, as I said earlier, I've been associated with the museum for a very long time. And I've seen a number of CEOs, but the man sitting beside me is a CEO that walks the talk. He wanted this museum to be open and inviting for all people. Now, in my 25 years with the museum, the Aboriginal people have not bothered to visit. It was a collection place. It looked at anthropology. It looked at archaeology. It didn't tell stories for people. It was more about collections. But I can sit beside my colleague and friend and say we've turned all of that on its head, and the numbers of Aboriginal people who have come through this museum since it opened, and even before it opened, has been mind-blowing, and it truly is a place for my people.
I'm going to dare to ask another question. Can you hear me?
Keep going.
The cultural precinct beyond the museum, the precinct and the city, how does the museum interplay with its bigger environment?
Goodness, who's going to have a go at that?
Well, again, I think maybe it starts with it being a catalytic project. I mean, there's a lot of things going around in the city of Perth and the site that we're in, and it'll spark all sorts of new opportunities. And just the fact that it's a magnet for people, It sits in a strong cultural precinct. There's a state theatre, a library, a gallery, and there's this project will really help to rejuvenate this area.
Look, sorry. I was going to, just in case people missed the last two times we mentioned the CNN quote about shaping the world, I might just allude to it once more. And I'll allude to it for this reason. I didn't dream that up. I didn't throw that at them, but I was really, really pleased when that came out because I think they actually got it. And I think what this project, this Museum Boola Bardip is going to do, it is going to shape our world. It's certainly, as Paul says, it's become a catalyst for further developments in the Cultural Centre. You'll have seen the developments in the Art Gallery that are happening as we speak. They will open in the new year on the rooftop there. We know that there's funding now to develop the Cultural Centre, and I certainly hope with the COVID stimulus packages there will be more cultural improvements that will follow that. And I think from that point of view, this project and the incredible amount of interest, those 420,000 people who wanted to come in a week, has actually demonstrated what the power of cultural institutions can be and why it's actually worth investing in them. And in fact, one of the ministers today at another event we had here, she said, it's just wonderful to see all these families just literally coming here to spend time in the museum, and they will, because it's free admission, they'll come back and back and back. But I think it goes beyond that, and I just sort of paraphrase something I said at the opening. The world's kind of in a mess at the moment. We had the bushfires, we're now in the middle of the pandemic. We've seen all kinds of political shenanigans that maybe some of them are sorting themselves out now, but who knows. The world is a very uncertain and crazy place at the moment. And, where can you turn? Where can you turn to a place that you need to turn to places you can trust? And whilst I'm sure, Stephen, you can totally trust the Australian Financial Review, I wouldn't want to. The kind of places people trust are their public institutions. They're places where you can find, you can actually go back to things that are real, whether it's science, whether it's culture, whether it's the wonders of the natural world. Those are the places we can go back to in these very uncertain times. That's why institutions like this are so important. As I always say, it's to try and explore the past, understand the present, and imagine the future. That's what this can do. So quite apart from the spatial impact, I hope it'll make people think in a whole different way.
And I think the city room has done that, Alec, in terms of actually extending back to the question. We created a space that didn't exist in the state previously. So it's now going to be the new destinations for lots of gatherings and celebrations and debates and challenges, which is at the heart of the museum and in terms of its ambition. But for the wider precincts, absolutely, it's a gift for the library and the art gallery to share their stories and be with and combine the museum. And it's part of your daily experience. You can walk through the space on the way into work, on home, into the surrounding institutions or education facilities. It's just going to be that new space that we never had. It's a covered space from the sheltered environment. It's grand. It's got a scale. It's got an amazing backdrop now. So I think it's different. It hasn't been done, and it doesn't exist anywhere else in Perth.
I think that's great. I'm going to try and call out for maybe another question from the audience.
Again, another international-based question, perhaps for the ambassador. This is, as this is an international project involving a Dutch architectural practice, how does it reflect the Dutch design philosophy in some way?
Well, the Dutch design philosophy is very much, I hinted on it already, is a collaborative approach, a consultative approach, openness, transparency is very important. So these are all aspects that come back, integration of different fields of interest. I think in this case, for example, but just to give a small example, a project like this takes many years. And you have elections meanwhile. So where do we go? The Dutch approach would be, well, we take that into account and we already have plan A, B, C, and D. And when we get there, okay, we don't get too nervous, we just take the other plan out and we make sure that within the framework we had, that was the money, that was the time limit. And what again is the question exactly, where are we working at? Okay, how do we redesign the whole thing? And that in consultation with all stakeholders. So get all the people on board, take them along. It takes a bit more time before you get there, but when you take all the people who have an interest along, in the end, they take all ownership of the program. And that's also what David said to me, what he liked so much when he was here on site, to sit with the builders, to hear their concerns, to see, are we still on track? Are there certain things that we have not taken into account? So every time reconsider, are we on the right track? Or should we take a little bit a different course? That is very much a Dutch approach. Yeah.
Is there another question from the audience? Or?
I could probably throw one in. There is a question just regarding, I guess, the museum moving forward. How much of the museum collection is now on display as opposed to being in storage? And is there thought to how that all of that additional content can be seen? And more specifically, when are the books going back on the shelves in Hackett Hall?
I'll try and do those in order. How much of the collection is on display is a really interesting one, because the collection in terms of the number of items is enormous, but some of those items are quite small. And I know sat at the back is my dear colleague Diana Jones, who looks after our collections and research area. And we do a huge amount of original research. That's one of the things that we really try to feature in the museum, is what we call revealing the museum, some of the things that happen behind the scenes that you would never know about. And one of the things we do is actually chart the biodiversity of WA, as well as looking for, all the kind of medical possibilities in some of these species as well. So our guys are, discovering new species all the time, and in doing that, so we reckon our collections number about 8 million items. But a lot of those items will be tiny little fleas or barnacles or spiders or things that you wouldn't actually put on display. They're part of a research collection. So I like to think of it more in terms of the kind of the I suppose the volume of the collection. So if you said what proportion of the actual number of that collection is, it would be probably wouldn't be 1%. But actually, in terms of the volume, of course, it's much greater than that, because a lot of the more significant or more, I suppose, visual objects are there. But what we're also going to do is, we will launch actually on Monday. Just got a text about it right then. Our digital platform. We've not launched it this week because we've been sending people around on a pre-arranged route just to make sure we can get people around. But from Monday, there'll be a digital platform you can download onto your phone, or you'll be able to borrow a device to go around. And that will give you a lot of more information behind the collections and links into them as well. So that's really the way we develop that. Hackett Hall books, we were going to put something up there, and the main way that a lot of people will view Otto is from that new link over there. You probably saw some people kind of looking over there before we came in. And if you put books behind him, it would really ruin his lines, I have to say. So right at the moment, those bookshelves are going to stay empty. And what we'll probably do is work with some artists in residence to develop some ideas there. But as a backdrop for Otto, actually that plain backdrop is much better. I suppose the other answer that Peter would want me to give is, well, let's just build another big extension. But there might be a few people who think they're first in the queue for that before we do that. But yeah.
Great. If you can hear me clearly, I'm going to say that I think we've come to a beautiful end to the discussion. If you can't hear me clearly, Alec, you can take over.
We can hear you perfectly clearly, thank you.
Back on. No, but seriously, thank you. I think to all the panelists and to the audiences, both those present and those online. It's been a terrific discussion. It's one that I feel that could go on for quite some time, and I hope we get a chance to continue it at some later date. But congratulations on the opening of this fabulous museum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, thank you, Stephen, David, and Mark, and obviously all my fellow panelists here. Thank you very much for coming, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Just another condition of my mind. Every human has a fire inside their heart. I stand close and feel the heat. If the world is just one piece of art, well, I don't want to miss.
Mark, thanks.
See you, David. Thanks. We'll talk soon, eh?
Talk soon. Bye-bye.
I'ma keep on running.